I make my living as a specialized cleaner, taking care of apartments and homes where people have passed away. Most of the time, the deceased are elderly folks. The morbid nature of the job never really bothered me. I saw it as a necessary service. At least, that was how I felt until tonight. I had taken on far too many jobs this week, blinded by the prospect of extra money. By the time I arrived at my final assignment, the sun had completely set. The property was an isolated house, standing in the middle of nowhere. The moment I parked my van near the entrance, a heavy sense of dread settled in my chest. I knew instinctively that this would not be a quick job. Stepping through the front door, I realized the house had not been cleared. Everything the old man owned was still exactly where he had left it. Usually, families hire movers to remove furniture before calling me in, but not this time. A single sheet of paper rested on a desk near the entryway. Sorry, but there were complications with the transport service. Please just clean as much as you can. The place where he died is the living room. I frowned. Why hadn't they just called me? Perhaps they worried I would cancel the contract. But I was already here, so I decided to do my best. As I navigated through the quiet house, a profound sadness washed over me. Framed family pictures decorated the walls. There was the old man smiling brightly. Another showed him eating dinner with relatives. A third picture showed him sitting in a large armchair, reading with a black cat resting on his lap. He looked genuinely happy. Now he was gone. The house was relatively small. A living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a single bathroom. The subtle, unmistakable stench of death hit me the moment I crossed the threshold into the living room. In the center of the room was a dark, horrific stain on the hardwood floor, roughly the size of a human body. This was undoubtedly where he had died. Decomposition had clearly run its course, and bodily fluids had soaked deep into the porous floorboards. I strapped on my respirator mask and got to work. The stain was incredibly stubborn. It took half an hour of intense scrubbing before I finally managed to lift it. Exhausted, I stayed seated on the floor for a moment. There was a small dining table set for two in the center. In the corner sat the very same armchair I had seen in the photograph. Beside it stood a tall bookshelf and a large, antique, full-body mirror. I caught my tired reflection in the glass, cursing the greed that kept me working this late. Shaking the thought, I opened the windows to air out the fumes and grabbed a coffee. When I returned, I noticed an old television in the corner. Hoping background noise would help, I turned it on, but only loud static played. I switched it off, but the moment I turned away, the television violently flickered back to life, blasting deafening static directly behind me. I cursed under my breath, turned it off once more, and forced myself to move on to the next room. Hours passed. The bathroom and kitchen were finally spotless. When I returned to the living room, the chemical odor had faded. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the room. I spun around. A heavy, black leather book lay open on the floor in front of the tall bookshelf. I bent down and curiously glanced at the open page. A bizarre symbol was drawn in thick ink, a triangle with smaller, jagged markings branching out from each corner, resembling the letter T. Directly beneath the symbol was a single cryptic sentence: Ecce donas, has offeritus canas, rementulum ive colum. I absent-mindedly read the strange words aloud. Meow, I gasped, looking up. Sitting just a few feet away, staring directly into my eyes, was the black cat from the family photographs. "Hey, buddy," I muttered, my voice trembling slightly. "You scared the hell out of me. Let's be friends." I reached out my hand. The cat calmly turned around, took a graceful leap forward, and disappeared straight through the solid glass of the full-body mirror. I froze completely. On the other side of the glass, I could clearly see the cat continuing to walk away from me. Trembling, I got to my feet and approached the mirror. I reached out a shaking hand, expecting my fingers to meet cold glass. Instead, my hand passed straight through the surface without any resistance. Driven by a terrifying curiosity, I took a step forward. Within seconds, my entire body had crossed the threshold of the mirror. I was standing on the other side. At first glance, the mirrored house seemed exactly the same. But my senses immediately told me something was terribly wrong. Sounds drifted from the kitchen. The rhythmic clatter of plates and the rich aroma of freshly cooked food. The cat slowly rotated its head to look at me. Its eyes were entirely gone. Two dark, rotting holes stared back at me from beneath matted fur. The flesh around its muzzle had decayed, exposing yellowed bone. Instinctively, I stumbled backward, desperate to return to my own world. This time, my back collided violently with solid, unbreakable glass. I pushed against the mirror with all my might, but it would not let me through. Meow. The sound was a low, wet, guttural growl. The kitchen noises ceased. Heavy footsteps approached rapidly. The old man from the photographs stepped into the living room, casually drying his hands on a stained towel. He smiled warmly. "Ah, Fluff," he said gently. "You brought a friend with you. Come, sit down, have dinner with me." Every fiber of my being urged me to run, but the dark, hollow intensity behind the old man's eyes warned me that refusing his hospitality would be a fatal mistake. I nodded slowly and forced my trembling legs toward the table. He brought out 2 steaming plates of rice and vegetables. "Oh, this feels wonderful," he sighed contentedly. He abruptly tilted his neck sharply to the left, crack, then slowly to the right, crack. The sickening sound of thick bone grinding against bone echoed through the room. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I accidentally stepped through the mirror. I can't go back." The old man laughed softly. "You can't go back because you left the key behind, dear. The book." I glanced down at my lap. "So I can't leave?" "Of course you can," he added suddenly. "Someone simply has to read the words aloud from the other side." Then the mirror opens up again. My heartbeat pounded fiercely in my ears. "Now," he said pleasantly, "let's eat." Then, without warning, he completely froze. His fork remained suspended mid-air. His eyes locked onto the wall, entirely unblinking. Almost a full minute went by before he suddenly resumed his motion. "Oh, please forgive my manners. My name is Roland. You're not eating?" "Ah, young men need meat." I sat frozen as he darted across the room, scooped the rotting feline into his arms, and skipped back to the table. The cat let out one final cry, crack. The sound of its spine snapping echoed loudly. Before my brain could process it, Roland slammed the dead animal directly onto my plate. Thick black blood oozed into the rice. The sweet stench of decay made me gag. Eat up now, dear. I swallowed hard. I need to wash my hands. Can I use your bathroom first? Oh yes, of course. I stood up, walked into the bathroom, and locked the door. I rushed to the window and threw it open, hoping for a fire escape. My breath caught. There was nothing outside, just an endless, suffocating void of absolute darkness stretching infinitely. I grabbed a bar of soap and hurled it out. I watched it fall forever. There was no ground. A deafening knock hit the door. Is everything all right in there, dear? Come out. His voice was heavily distorted and monstrous. The brass doorknob turned. The wooden frame splintered until the lock violently tore free. Roland stood there, perfectly calm. Please return to the table. I did not dare argue. I sat back down. Eat. All patience had evaporated from his tone. I'm not hungry, I whispered. Perhaps we should begin by teaching you not to abandon the dinner table, he murmured. It will be an easy lesson. After all, you cannot run away if you no longer possess the ability to stand. Adrenaline flooded my veins. I snatched the heavy steak knife from the table and lunged forward, driving the blade directly into Roland's left eye. The steel sank deep with a sickening crunch. Roland didn't even flinch. Oh dear, he sighed. Calmly, he pulled the knife free. His eyeball came out with it, skewered on the blade. And here I was, trying to cut back on meat. He bit his own eye off the sharp blade with a wet crunch. I turned and sprinted toward the mirror, screaming the bizarre Latin phrase. Nothing happened. The glass remained solid. Now, Roland's voice bellowed behind me, distorted into a demonic roar. Let us begin the lesson. I spun around. The monstrous entity that had once been Roland slammed into the wall. His flesh was mutating, turning a necrotic purple. One of his arms stretched impossibly long. I ran. I bolted toward the kitchen, then dashed into the bedroom and hid. A second later, the creature charged in, tripping over the bed frame. Seizing the distraction, I sprinted back into the living room. My eyes locked onto the heavy-duty industrial chemicals. As the creature emerged, I snatched the largest bottle of corrosive solvent and hurled the acid directly into its mutating face. The monster shrieked in blind rage. There is no escape. I bolted for the front door. The creature lunged blindly, its massive claws catching my shoulder, slicing deep into my flesh. I ripped the front door open and pressed myself flat against the interior wall. The creature tried to halt, but its massive body moved too quickly. Just as it breached the doorway, I slammed both of my hands into its back with every last reserve of strength. The beast stumbled forward, pitching out of the house and into the endless, suffocating darkness. A furious roar echoed through the void as it plummeted. Its screams grew fainter until the darkness swallowed the sound completely. I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. I have tried everything, nothing works. Eventually, I discovered that certain actions I perform on this side inexplicably manifest on the other side. By writing on the blank pages of a journal, I managed to push this message through the barrier. If you are reading this text right now, please, I am begging you, I am still trapped. Any large mirror will work as a conduit. Go to the largest mirror in your home. Draw the symbol. A triangle with T-shaped branches at the corners. Speak these exact words aloud. Eshdonas, has offerets kanas, rimentulum, I've column, and then call out my name. Lars, please, help me come home. It seemed like the easiest money in the world. I was fresh out of college, drowning in student loan debt, and desperately scanning the streets for any work that would keep me from filing for bankruptcy. That was when I saw the flyer stapled to a decaying tree on the sidewalk. Wanted, weekend house sitter, 3 days, 2 nights, will pay for food, $500 a day, call Agatha. I should have been immediately suspicious. But the promise of paying next month's rent overshadowed any lingering doubts. Agatha turned out to be a retired, wildly successful fashion critic. A woman who had become a hermit but lived entirely on massive generational wealth. She needed someone to watch her estate for the weekend and promised to double the pay for future gigs if I did well. $3,000 for a single weekend. I was desperate enough to ignore the glaring red flags. I arrived on Friday at 10 o'clock sharp. The rules were strict. Once I stepped through the front door, I wasn't allowed to leave the property until Sunday afternoon. The house itself was a breathtaking, pristine white mansion. But my awe immediately evaporated when I saw the dolls. Guarding either side of the front porch were 2 gigantic, grotesque figures mounted on tall wooden poles. They were crafted from coarse, burlap-like sackcloth, standing over 6 feet tall. They had no mouths, only massive, dead black circles embroidered into their faces for eyes. Stringy black yarn served as their hair. The male doll wore a weather-beaten Victorian suit, while the female was dressed in a faded mauve ballet tutu. They were intensely out of place, exuding a horrifying aura. Agatha barely greeted me. Her taxi was already waiting. She told me she had left a list of rules on the kitchen table and vanished out the door. Most of the instructions on that list were normal, but others were deeply, fundamentally unsettling. Every night at 9 o'clock sharp, you must be in the living room, staring out the picture window. You must watch everything they do. Do not look away. They like an audience. When they bow to you, clap 3 times and close the curtains. Another rule read, if you are injured or feel sick, sleep on the couch on the back patio. Be there by 9, and you'll feel better by morning. Friday night at 10 minutes to 9, I stood before the massive living room window. Exactly at 9, the nightmare began. The 2 lifeless burlap dolls suddenly leapt off their wooden poles. The male tapped a brass statue in the garden, and an eerie, unearthly music filled the night air. And then they began to dance. It was a fluid, mesmerizing, yet utterly terrifying waltz. When the music stopped, their void-like eyes locked onto mine. They bowed. Trembling, I gave 3 loud claps, ripped the curtains shut, and spent the night hiding under my bed. The next morning, exhausted and terrified, I tripped over my own sneaker and severely sprained my ankle. Remembering the rule, I hobbled to the back patio couch that night. At 9, the unearthly music started, then abruptly stopped. 2 pairs of unnaturally light footsteps approached the deck. The patio door creaked open. The female doll loomed over me, clamping a coarse burlap hand over my mouth to stifle my scream. With her other hand, she gently stroked my hair. The male doll grasped my agonizing ankle. He stared deeply into my eyes, snapped his fingers, and I plunged into darkness. When I woke up, the sun was shining, and my foot was entirely healed. When Agatha returned, she finally explained. The dolls were mysterious entities she had acquired when her health began failing. They possessed incredible healing abilities and warded off danger, but only if they were consistently given an audience. She couldn't leave the house unattended, which was why she was paying me a fortune. I became Agatha's regular house sitter, but calling it a safe routine would be a lie. I was trading my sanity for a paycheck. Every weekend, I sat in the dark and watched them, and every weekend, their dances grew more frantic, more elaborate, as if they were feeding on my undivided attention. The phantom music began to claw at my mind, even when I was miles away in my own apartment. The dread was a tightening noose. Then, my estranged, toxic sister, Melanie, found out about the money. Melanie was unhinged, entitled, and furiously jealous. She tracked me down during one of Agatha's week-long vacations, bursting through the front door at 8:30 at night, demanding I surrender the cushy job to her. When I refused, her eyes went wide with genuine madness. Screaming insults, she grabbed a heavy antique glass bottle from a shelf, smashed it against the wall, and lunged at me with the jagged bottleneck. I bolted for the back patio just as the unearthly music began to play. I was too late. I had broken the rule. I tripped over a footstool. Melanie was on top of me in seconds, screaming like a banshee, pressing the broken glass into my throat. Blood trickled down my neck. Suddenly, Melanie's face dropped in utter horror. She was forcefully ripped away into the air. I gasped for breath. The female doll gently scooped me up into her arms, holding me securely. Through the patio doors, I watched the male doll drag a violently thrashing Melanie out to the dark lawn. The phantom music swelled. Not a waltz this time, but a frenzied, discordant symphony. With the female doll and myself serving as the captive audience, the male doll forced my sister into a dance. Melanie kicked and screamed, but the doll's burlap fingers locked onto her wrists with the crushing force of a vice. He spun her violently. A sickening crack echoed across the yard as her shoulder dislocated. But her arm was instantly yanked back upward into a grotesque ballroom posture. Melanie's screams dissolved into choked, wet sobs. The male doll led her through a dizzying series of turns. Her legs twisted unnaturally. Her knees buckled and popped, bending at horrifying angles to keep time with the frantic tempo. Melanie entered a forced, paralyzed trance. Her face was frozen in a wide, tearing smile, but her eyes were bulging, weeping tears of absolute, screaming agony. She was a flesh and blood marionette, being pushed far beyond the limits of human anatomy. Bones snapped and ground together to the beat of the music. Kst. As the music reached a deafening crescendo, he pulled her shattered body tight against his chest. The female doll abruptly turned my head away, forcing me to stare at the brick wall. Behind me, I heard the heavy, wet sound of meat tearing, of joints being violently ripped from their sockets. Then came a blood-curdling, agonizing shriek, and then dead silence. The female doll set me down on the couch. The male doll returned to the patio, completely alone. The female gently touched the cuts on my throat, snapped her fingers, and I passed out. The next morning, the local news reported that my sister's body had been found miles away in the deep woods. The authorities concluded she had been mauled to death by a massive bear. They conveniently failed to mention to the press that the medical examiner had found coarse, black burlap threads buried deep inside her shredded throat. Agatha passed away yesterday. She drafted her will before the end, leaving the mansion entirely to me. I thought it was my way out. I planned to sell the estate, pay off my debts, and never look back. I even contacted the gardener, begging him to take the dolls. He refused. He told me the house was their stage now. I thought I could just list the property and walk away clean. But last night, I woke up in my own tiny apartment, 30 miles away from the mansion. The room was freezing. Outside my third-story window, drifting up from the empty city street, I heard it. That faint, unearthly music. I crept to the glass and looked down. There, standing perfectly still under the flickering amber glow of a streetlight, were the two burlap figures. They're dead. Embroidered eyes were staring straight up at my window, waiting. I realized then with absolute, paralyzing certainty that I can never sell the mansion. I can never leave. I am not just their caretaker. I belong to them now. They don't just want an audience, they demand one. And if I don't give them their stage, I know exactly what they will do to me when the music stops. Here is the expanded, detailed version of the story in English. Written specifically with a natural flow and clean formatting, so that a text-to-speech, TTS, reader can read it smoothly without interruption. Text: my wife died in a car crash exactly 3 years ago. Last night, she unlocked the front door and told me to run. I know exactly how this sounds. I am fully aware of the implications of those words. That is precisely why I have not gone to the police, and why I have completely isolated myself from my family. Because if I say it out loud to another living human being, it transitions from a solitary nightmare into a horrifying reality. I simply do not think my fractured brain can handle the weight of that reality right now. To make you understand, I need to take you back to the beginning. My wife passed away 3 years ago in a massive, devastating pileup on the interstate highway during an exceptionally violent rainstorm. I did not actually witness the crash myself. I only got the phone call. The sound of the officer's voice over the roaring static of the storm is permanently burned into my memory. By the time I frantically drove to the scene, Abandoning my car on the shoulder and sprinting through the freezing downpour, the paramedics had already covered her vehicle with a heavy blue tarp. I remember the state trooper physically holding me back, placing a heavy hand on my chest and explicitly warning me not to look. He told me it would ruin my memory of her. But I did not listen. In my desperate, grief-stricken state, I fought past him and looked anyway. I regretted it the absolute second I laid eyes on the wreckage. After that terrible night, my entire existence dissolved into a meaningless gray blur. People often tell you that grief fundamentally alters your brain chemistry, that it changes your memory and distorts your perception of time. Maybe they are entirely right, because for the past 3 years, every single evening at exactly 8:32, I still look toward the front door of our house. I have never once believed she was actually coming back. It is just the exact time she used to arrive home from her evening shift at the hospital. It became a deeply ingrained trauma habit, a phantom reflex that I simply never managed to break, no matter how much therapy I sat through. Every night, the clock would strike 8:32. My chest would tighten, I would stare at the deadbolt, and then nothing would happen until yesterday. Yesterday evening, at exactly 8:32, someone knocked. It was not a frantic pounding. It was 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. I remember checking the grandfather clock in the hallway first. Actually letting out a hollow, bitter laugh at the cruel timing of it. I naturally assumed it was a late delivery driver dropping off a package. Or perhaps one of the neighborhood teenagers messing around in the dark. I slowly got up from the couch, walked over to the heavy wooden door, and leaned in to look through the glass peephole. My wife was standing outside on the porch. She was wearing the exact same dark navy winter coat she had worn on the day she died. She was holding the exact same black leather handbag. Her dark hair was plastered against her cheeks, still damp and dripping, as if she had just been caught in a torrential downpour. Even though it was a perfectly dry, clear evening outside. She looked exactly as she did the moment she walked out of our bedroom 3 years ago. For a long, agonizing second, my brain genuinely stopped working. My cognitive functions completely shut down. I just stood there, paralyzed, holding my breath, staring through the thick glass of the peephole. I thought I was finally having the psychotic break I had been dreading for years. Then she smiled. It was not a wide, exaggerated, or unnatural smile. It was just perfectly normal. It was the exact same tired but warm smile she always gave me when she came home after a completely ordinary, exhausting day at work. And then she spoke. Her voice drifted right through the solid wood of the door, crystal clear. "You are taking too long." That specific phrase completely broke me. Those were the exact words she used to say, playfully teasing me, whenever I would leave her standing on the porch, fumbling with the keys. I do not even possess the memory of reaching out and unlocking the heavy metal deadbolt. I just remember the metallic click, and suddenly she was inside the house. She was walking right past me, leaving a trail of faint, wet footprints across the dry hardwood floor of the entryway. I could not pull oxygen into my lungs. My chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. I found myself obsessively staring at her hands as she moved, because she was still wearing her gold wedding ring. The little diamond caught the dim light of the hallway just the way it always did. She walked smoothly into the kitchen, behaving as if absolutely nothing in the world was wrong, and casually asked me why all the lights in the house were turned off. It was her exact voice. It was her exact posture. The way she shifted her weight onto her left leg when she stopped moving. It was flawless. I actually collapsed against the door frame. Started sobbing uncontrollably and begged her to tell me where she had been. She stopped, turned to look at me with an expression of mild confusion, laughed a soft, breathy laugh and said, "At work, where else would I be?" God, part of my shattered heart wanted to believe it so incredibly badly. I wanted to run forward and pull her into my arms, but the primitive, survival-driven part of my brain was screaming at me. Something felt horribly, unspeakably wrong. It was not anything blatantly obvious. It was a collection of tiny, microscopic anomalies. There were minuscule pauses before she answered my questions, as if she were mentally processing the audio and calculating a response. When she smiled, the expression formed on her face a fraction of a second, too late to match the emotion in her voice. She was blinking, but significantly less than a normal, living person naturally does. Standing there in the dim light of the kitchen, it felt exactly like watching something that was trying very hard to meticulously act human, despite having only ever read a manual on how humans were supposed to behave. Then, she slowly turned her head and looked toward the large antique mirror hanging in the hallway, and she completely froze. Her entire posture locked up, becoming rigid and statue-like. I noticed the terrifying detail almost immediately. She was not staring at her own reflection in the glass. She was staring directly at me in the mirror. Specifically, she was staring at the space right over my shoulder. Then, her voice dropped to a frantic, trembling whisper as she asked, "Who is standing behind you?" My stomach dropped completely out of my body. The temperature in the room felt like it plummeted 20 degrees. I knew for an absolute fact that I was alone in the house. There was nobody behind me, but the sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from her face forced me to react. I spun around instantly, my fists clenched, ready to fight for my life. But the hallway was completely empty. There was nothing but the shadows of the coat rack and the dark wood of the floor. When I whipped my head back around to look at her, she was not smiling anymore. The imitation of my wife had completely dropped. She looked absolutely, genuinely terrified. Her wide, unblinking eyes were locked in a death stare on the empty space, right behind where I was standing. She leaned forward and whispered, her voice vibrating with a panic that shook me to my core. "Do not let it learn your face." Before I could even process the warning, every single light bulb in the house violently blew out at the exact same time. The sharp pops echoed like gunfire. Total, suffocating darkness instantly swallowed the room. Immediately, I heard movement in the kitchen. fast, incredibly heavy movement. Then came the footsteps. It was not one set of human feet. It sounded like multiple heavy limbs crashing against the hardwood, running and frantically circling the perimeter of the room at a speed way too fast to belong to a normal biological creature. The floorboards groaned and snapped under the immense weight. I fell backward, scrambling frantically away from the noise. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking so violently, I dropped it twice before I finally managed to fumble with the screen and force the flashlight application to turn on. The harsh white beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the kitchen. The room was completely empty. My wife was entirely gone. The heavy wooden back door was standing wide open, swinging slightly on its hinges, letting the cold night air rush into the house. A trail of small, wet footprints led directly outside into the pitch-black darkness of the backyard. But my phone's flashlight caught something else on the kitchen floor too. Right beside the wet shoe prints, there was another set of marks on the hardwood. Another set of footprints, but these were impossibly long. The toes were stretched and distorted, ending in deep, sharp scratches that had actually gouged the expensive wood. And the most terrifying part was the path they took. They did not come from outside. They originated from the darkest corner of the living room. And they stopped exactly right behind the specific spot I had been standing in when I was talking to my wife. Something immense and entirely silent had been looming directly behind my back the entire time, just standing over my shoulder in the dark, watching us. I did not sleep a single second last night. I have been sitting completely frozen in the center of my living room with every surviving lamp turned on, holding a heavy kitchen knife, just waiting desperately for the sun to finally come up. The morning light offered no comfort. The day bled away into evening in a terrifying haze of paranoia. But now, the sun has gone down again. And tonight, just moments ago, at exactly 8:32, someone knocked on the front door again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. I am sitting here on the floor, staring at the deadbolt. I am not getting up. I am not looking through the peephole. But this time is different. Because this time, I can hear my wife crying softly on the other side of the heavy wooden door. She is sobbing, begging me to let her in, telling me she is scared of the dark, and God help me. Her voice sounds so incredibly real.